Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Mouthy Money podcast. Today, as ever, I'm joined by Chris Chute, Head of Consumer Finance at Financial Communications Consultancy MRM. Chris, good morning.
Morning, Ed. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm not too bad today. I'm back in the UK, which is very exciting for me. Back at my usual spot to be recording this one.
How was your flight?
It was 12-hour daytime flight. Do not recommend those. Always go on a nighttime flight because then at least everybody's asleep and can't be given to getting frustrated for sitting in the same spot for 12 hours. But
there you go. That's a key financial tip there, guys. Pay the extra for the night flight if you have to.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
well worth it. Yeah.
But we're not going to get into that today. Travel stuff maybe for another day. We have one very clear and important topic today to be discussing with our audience, and audience is an important part of that discussion. We are here today to discuss MRM's latest Young Money report for 2025. Is that right?
That's right, yeah. We do an annual report into what 18 to 30-year-olds think about money and what they're doing, their hopes, fears, dreams, aspirations, where they get their info. And it's enlightening to say the least. And we've got some really interesting findings out of the latest one. So, yeah, please you give me the opportunity to have a chat about it, Ed.
I unfortunately lost my young person card based around your demographics that you've just given there.
Quite a while ago, no?
Yeah, a while ago, yes, thank you. I'm actually turning 36 in February, so that puts me 6 years beyond the
in the rearview mirror. It's in the rearview mirror.
But we're going to try and think a little bit about how, through the data, what young people are doing about their money and how they interact with the information. I think is the most important thing here, isn't it?
Yeah.
Take us through some of the headlines that the report has found this year.
Yeah, no problem. The first thing to say is that 18 to 30-year-olds are relatively optimistic, which is good news. I mean, you'd be forgiven if you're looking at sort of news around the bond markets and the way that the markets are kind of tanking and mortgage rates going up and inflation, that they might feel a little bit browbeaten by it all. But actually, our first sort of thing, we spoke to 1,000 18 to 30-year-olds, and the first thing they said is that 2/3 are expecting their standard of living to increase in the next 12 months. So that's optimistic. That's good. That's really good. And I've been in this industry for nearly 20 years, sort of financial services comms, and it isn't always the case. People can sometimes feel a little bit like perhaps their aspirations aren't going to be that achievable over the course of the next year and beyond. But actually, it seems like most people are, which is fantastic to hear about. But with that comes a sort of reflection of the complexity of the financial landscape at the moment, and 90% of the young people we spoke to say that they want more guidance when it comes to managing their money, which is really interesting because it's obviously always important to make sure that you've got a good plan in place and you know what you're doing and all the rest of it. But actually, it's probably even more important than it ever has been to make sure that you're not falling into any potential pitfalls or making all the right calls with the resources that you do have. And what's even more interesting for me in my line of work, and for a lot of the organisations that our listeners probably work with, almost half of those young people said they believe that their financial services providers should be the ones providing them with guidance and education. So that was the joint highest. So they also think schools and colleges should be doing that at a younger age, and that even was higher than their belief in their own personal responsibility to educate themselves. So 36% said that it falls on them to do it themselves, and then 41% said they would seek guidance from their family, which seems natural, and we've all done that. And family and friends is a good route to kind of talk about these things. So I think that's the fact that people want guidance from financial services providers is really kind of interesting. It shows the kind of faith they put in what they're saying, and shows where they think that responsibility should lie to help them to make those decisions. And I don't think they're wrong in that. I think that's a fair conclusion to draw. But then perhaps when we get into the kind of audience stuff that you touched on, Ed, is where it gets even more information. So when they were asked where they get their financial information from, social media was by far and away the most popular destination. So nearly half of respondents cited it. But then, interestingly, a third said that they also, and tech has enabled this a bit more with apps and email and online banking and that kind of thing, a third also highlighted direct communications from their FS providers as the way that they get that information. So either by email or in-app messages. And then more traditional outlets, where perhaps you and I might have got our financial information when we turned 20, like newspapers and television was cited at around a quarter of that level. So they are turning to social media as a starting point to get ideas, information about products and services that might be out there. And then a large part of that rise in social media interaction we think can be attributed to influencers. And that's something we've talked about here, isn't it? 6 in 10 say that they follow a influencer. That grows to 74% among the young people we surveyed in London. So it's higher when you live in London. And only 3% of those people said that they didn't trust influencer information. And a substantial 77% do. And that chimes, we did this report two years ago, we covered similar. We do it every year, but we did a report 2 years ago in 2022, which the FCA, the regulator, quoted some of the data from when they were talking about social media promotions and some of their concerns around that. And it was a similar proportion. So it seems as though young people are continuing to turn to this, and there has been a consistent trend over the last 2 years that it's social media with influencers who kind of set the tone for this kind of thing. So Ed, got me thinking, you're a influencer, aren't you?
Well, I think there's quite a lot to unpack with this, and I'm gonna pick at these various points. I'll tackle that one first. Am I an influencer? I think a lot of financial journalists would probably be very reluctant to use the phrase. I think in the broadest sense, where you have a platform and not necessarily just social media, but an audience on a website or even a podcast like what we're talking to each other on right now, does give you an element of influence over the people who are listening to you or reading what you write and that kind of thing. So I think, yes, perhaps that does make someone like me, a financial journalist, a voice of influence, and the degree of that influence I think can be debated. I think journalists are a funny one because I didn't study finance or business or anything like that at university. I have professional qualifications that pertain to journalism. I did history at university, which made me quite good at writing, which made me quite good at being a journalist and writing and editing and that kind of thing. And that's kind of my professional background. So, can I realistically be telling people what to do with their money? Well, only in as much as I've worked in personal finance since 2016 and have learned enough about it that I can talk about it on the hoof, kind of thing. So I think that makes it, gives me complicated feelings about being called, you're the kind of the influencer in the room sort of thing.
Yeah, no, I mean, a qualified journalist, you're as part of that, you're set with a series of, like a framework of ethics, aren't you, really, in terms of what you can push out and how you can push it out. Is that fair to say that, you're aware of what you say has, your word carries weight? And
we can start going deep into the philosophy of media and journalism.
Maybe not. But.
There are there are straightforward, practical codes of conduct, things like the editor's code and stuff like that you have to kind of adhere to, and that has things like making sure your sources are reliable, all that whatever it is, and there's an element of kind of professional integrity in that, and you can join, media associations and stuff like that as a part of that, and your publication tends to be, regulated or self-regulated in some sort of way by those kind of codes of conduct. In a more philosophical way, I guess, if you're being a kind of the sort of sentimental approach would be like, I have to report the truth and all that kind of Washington Post, the first rough draft of history and all that kind of thing. I came into journalism feeling like that, like I was, at the coalface of current events and being able to tell people what was happening in the world and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Of course, in 2025, the coherence of that kind of philosophy is very strained, and there is a lot of discussion about, how truthful some journalists are and whether journalists use their platforms for the right purposes, and client journalism and all this kind of stuff. But those are kind of time-old things, and you can think about the old adages like news is reporting things that other people don't want you to say. Everything else is just PR, which, again, we can have a philosophical discussion about that, perhaps another time.
But there are red lines, right, Ed? I suppose what you've outlined there means that, because let me put it in context. Because look, there's a lot of social media. You just need a camera, right? You just need a camera and a phone, and you can sit down, and as long as you're able to speak with some form of credibility on the subject in an engaging way, then you can build an audience and start talking about money. And there are very real consequences to all of the stuff we put online, let's be honest, and we've seen that with, the way that politics has been hijacked and used by Elon Musk and other people to kind of stoke tensions and bending the truth and all the rest of it. But I think in our corner of the world, in the kind of money sense, that the content works from a lot of these influencers because it's relatable, eye-catching, emotion-led, informative, practical, all those good things, and people deserve credit for that. So they're obviously very good at that. But it does sort of beg the question, where are the red lines for them? Where is the framework that's going to stop it? Because traditionally in the financial world, the FCA and others have had a very strict framework on what you can and can't say to stop people having negative financial outcomes. And I know the FCA are looking at this. They, late last year, they censured 20 influencers who were perhaps peddling stuff that is considered to be the other side of that red line. I will also say that I think a lot of influencers that I follow online are good people and seem kind of to be encouraging good habits and wanting people to do the right thing. So it's definitely not all influencers are bad, far from it. But there is a large enough subset of people who are able to garner an audience that can really lead people up the garden path and leave them in quite serious financial trouble. And I think that's why these grey areas are increasingly coming to the fold. And the fact is that 18 to 30-year-olds are getting this information from these sources. So while most of that will be good, that still leaves room for people to fall foul of people who might not have the best intentions or might not know what they're peddling. And that can lead to issues. So I think, it's definitely an area that I think people listening to this will probably have experienced, will have seen and will have come across. And you do need that note of caution a little bit without meaning to sound too boring.
Yeah, I mean, what's really key here is that when you look at the difference between the kind of the audience channels, so if you think about kind of traditional media, which obviously, in the data, in the report, suggests that not huge numbers of people are relying on now, it's a question of gatekeeping. So, for me to write about finance, I have to have an editor who approves my work, and I have to, be able to demonstrate that I can talk about write about the topic that I'm looking at and that kind of thing. And then that goes to, an audience that is established with whatever publication you're writing for or speaking in, whatever. The difference with gatekeeping in social media is the only thing gatekeeping your access to potentially limitless audiences. I mean, we're talking billions of people here. The only thing gatekeeping that is algorithms that are designed by social media companies, and nobody really knows what goes into those algorithms other than the people who create them. So the barrier to entry is, how much can I work this algorithm in my favor in order to deliver information to people that they're going to respond to and click and like and share and all that kind of stuff. And it turns the plane for what is information into an absolute Wild West. And I mean, we've just seen Mark Zuckerberg turning on a sixpence, saying, "Oh, we're getting rid of all the fact checkers and we're going to have free speech with community notes, a la X style." And it really suddenly you realise, well, actually, there's nobody really gatekeeping that information. It's all just there, and the only thing stopping you from getting it is, what the algorithm serves to you, basically. In terms of financial information, and this is from my own perspective as a person who uses social media, considering how much I write about finance and how much I Google it and, all this kind of stuff, I get served very little stuff on social media about, finance and money and economics. Or
really, that's interesting.
I don't get anything, and I don't know if it's because the algorithm has picked up on the fact that I'd rather watch funny cat videos than I would, learn about what's happening in the market, because I'm busy doing that in my day job. Maybe it's clever enough that it knows that, but I don't feel like I get served stuff at all, really, which I find, very interesting. But clearly lots of people are getting served that content. Some of it's good, some of it's horrendous. And actually, when I do get served stuff, it tends to be the scammier end of the spectrum. It tends.
So
to
what
be,
would be in that spectrum? Who's at the scammier end? Without naming names, of course.
Well, it's always the stuff about, like, it's the people who say that they have found a way to earn money in non-traditional ways, or you see somebody driving a Lambo around in Dubai saying, I've earned £1 million doing options trading. Just follow my. And they're always selling a. It's never like here's the way to do it. It's always, if you pay for my course on how to do it, you can learn how to do it, and then you shell out £200 and get absolutely nothing out of it other than they've pocketed your money, kind of thing. That's what I tend to see on social media, and then. I don't know. It's all kind of just this mad world of get rich quick and all this kind of thing.
That's nothing new, right? The get rich quick scheme,
No.
to be fair. But I think you're right. It's served more effectively into people who might be more susceptible to it than it ever has been. Really, there was a few degrees of separation before you got to speak to the charlatan, whereas now. Like you say, and they do tend to follow a particular mould. The muscle car and the guru around money seems to be one of those tropes, if you like.
If you think about 30 years ago, let's call it even 40 years ago, what was the opportunity for a scammer looking to get in somebody's head and get their money? A phone call, maybe, a dodgy letter which looks like it comes from HMRC or something like that, or telling you need to pay up or whatever. The avenues of approach were much narrower, simply because so much media was consumed through traditionally gate-kept media, be that the BBC, television, or the papers and that kind of thing. Now there's a million different ways in which a scammer can get in touch with you and get their hands on your bank details and therefore all of your money and that kind of thing. It's one frightening levels of access. I don't know how you resolve that, but I guess we don't want to go too far down the scams.
Well, it's not just scams, is it? I mean, like I said, there are plenty of influencers who I follow who I think give really good, sound, technical, principle-based advice. Rules of thumb, as I think one of our guests recently said, which I think is sharing. We talked before about loud budgeting. I really like that phrase, and I think there's a lot of room for that, without a doubt. So long as everybody is clear on what is being said, and we do it on this podcast. You do it. The disclaimer that whatever we talk about is not financial advice, right? If you are considering this, you need to think carefully about what you do beforehand. And then I say this as a financial services communicator, we need to have more honest, emotion-led, open discussions about this sort of stuff. So the influencers who are doing that, you can't decry that. I think it's about what they're talking about. And interestingly, we do have some numbers on that, which I think sort of show that most of it is at the positive end of the spectrum. So one of the questions we asked was, have you taken any of the following actions based on advice or information influencers have provided? 47% said they've reduced their spending, which I think couldn't necessarily be seen as someone who's trying to scam someone. 41% have created a financial plan or a budget. 38% have built up cash savings. 28% have invested in stocks and shares. 27% have paid off any debts. And then when you get to a sort of lower proportion, 26% have used a buy now, pay later scheme. We'll probably start. 20% have invested in crypto assets based purely about what an influencer has said. 15% have invested in assets such as property and bought property. I find that quite an interesting stat because do you need influencers to tell you that buying property is a good idea? I don't know. 14% invested in currency, and then 4% of people have increased or decreased their pensions contributions of those 18 to 30-year-olds, which I think also tells a bit of a story about that. So if you look at that as a spectrum, most people are doing things that you wouldn't necessarily say are bad off the back of that, and that's kind of where I'm at with the influencers that I speak to. But there are riskier elements of that. We talk, the buy now, pay later stuff, the investing in crypto assets, where you do need to be clear about what you're doing, and if you're basing it purely off that, then that's not necessarily a good thing.
I think, and it's interesting because with those kind of categories you mentioned there, it's quite easy in our own minds to start thinking, okay, well that's good, or that's bad, or that's good, you know, depending on which category you're talking about. You know, if it's crypto, the knee-jerk reaction is probably, or, you know, something bad's probably happening there, but, you know, perhaps not necessarily.
Oh, crypto's mainstream now, isn't it? Bitcoin
Right.
and things like that. Yeah.
But then, you know, if somebody's thinking about a pension on the back of something a influencer said, I think it really matters what that information was that the influencer shared, right? Because a pension, okay, increasing contributions to your pension, you know, there's nothing bad in that. But, you know, is an influencer out there telling somebody to put their entire pension into, you know, medical stocks or something because it'll generate crazy good returns? You're talking about pensions, but within that, there's really dangerous potential for information, and people can have their pensions ruined by having, you know, bad information inside a pension. So I think, you know, it can be really important to have that discussion about pensions. We've talked about it loads on the podcast, and you know, we clip it for social media and that kind of thing. And it actually does get really good engagement. We've found people really are interested in hearing about it. But yeah, there's still, like, within that category, you know, a lot of room for error, I guess. So I think, I don't know. I think and this comes through in the findings of the report is the white elephant in the room, right? Is that financial firms are very quiet on the most part. Is that fair to say?
Do you know what? I would have thought that before I did this, but we looked at a sample of 32 financial services companies across the product ranges. So not necessarily 32 largest, but what we consider to be a good cross section across credit, lending, investing, saving, property, mortgages, all that kind of good stuff. Retail banking, so high street banks you'd have heard of, and all the rest of it. And there's some duplication here because people follow more than one, and it was across the four main channels that young people use, so Instagram, TikTok, X, and Facebook. And by last count, there was 38 million. They had a social media follower footprint of 38 million plus. So they're on there and they're saying good things. And actually, the feedback we got is that young people want financial services firms to say more about these things and not necessarily leave that as a. And I think that really brings up an interesting where the future's going with this, because you touched before about being a financial journalist, and you would quote people from companies who. Before, are we reaching the stage where you need to think about who your social media, if you're a company and you work in, you know, my line of work, who your social media spokesperson is, and how are you creating content for them? Because clearly the information shows that younger people are more susceptible to messages that are pushed through there. So you need to think about what you're presenting there. Do the existing cohort of quality social media influencers go off and get financial qualifications so that they are able to talk about this stuff from a safe standpoint as far as the regulator, the FCA, is concerned, and some of these companies? Because, you know, if I sat across somebody from a bank or from an investment company or a pensions company and say, what's stopping you from being really active and visible on TikTok? They'd probably turn around and say, well, if the regulatory regime means that I'm not able to do that to the extent that perhaps I would like. But the FCA are looking to kind of clarify the grey areas with what they're doing. They're clearly heading in that direction. So I think that, and young people have said before, they want financial services to influence their decision. And they've said it in this report, 47% of people want the financial services firms to take the lead in giving them good financial guidance and information. So if that's the case, what's the plan for that? I think we as an industry, the regulator and those influencers are going to have to move to a slightly more comfortable spot where it's clearer where the red lines are and where those, you know, scammers sit compared to people who are just trying to create good financial habits. And I think this space will evolve a lot more and will become a lot more credible. What it can't do is then kill the content that's made it successful in the first place. It has to feel authentic and has to work like as it is now. So it's finding that balance, which I think is really interesting from a geeky comms point of view, but also is crucial so people are making the right calls at the right time with the right information.
Yeah, I think that's actually really. I think it's interesting for kind of anyone who's curious as to why they don't hear more often from, you know, a financial firm that they might have some kind of interest in, either being a customer or even an investor, perhaps, or something like that. You know, private investor or whatever it might be. I think what's really important to emphasize is that the reason why a lot of these companies are very quiet or focus their channels on building their kind of brand reputation, I guess, in the broadest sense, rather than providing specific information to people, is because they're so highly strung by the regulators' rules, and they are so. I mean, hesitate to use the word terrified, but sometimes it comes across like that. They're just terrified of saying the wrong thing on social media and getting an absolute, blizzard of bad publicity as a result, right? And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have, influencers who are on social media, and anecdotally, we are seeing more of the kind of more reputable end of those influencers are beginning to talk openly about the fact that they're doing things like advice qualifications and stuff to really kind of get that badge of honor, to make sure that the FCA doesn't come after them and say, you've been doing this, and obviously the FCA are cracking down. What I find interesting in that, and I haven't actually spoken to anybody who's doing it, although I do know a few who are, is once you've got that advice qualification, that's inherently starts to put some limitations on the way in which you talk about certain things, and the way, even if at a basic level, like we do on the podcast, where we start dishing out disclaimers about things, telling people to do their own research, etc. You don't want to see. I don't want to see a situation basically where the honest ones are all, and this is the same as anything. You don't want a situation where the regulation kills all the honesty, starves of any oxygen, and all it leaves behind is the ones who are dishonest, who either aren't under the purview because they're abroad somewhere, or simply don't care and aren't being caught. Because I think ultimately one of the things that for me, and one of the most dangerous things about social media, and this comes through in many different ways, is it ultimately differs from the front page of a newspaper, because everybody can see what is on the front of a newspaper. You can go to a newsagent and buy it, or you can look on their website and see it. On social media, nobody can see what everybody's looking at. There are millions of people on there looking at a million different things, and it's impossible to say what it is they're ultimately looking at without going through the records on a case-by-case basis. So what I mean by that is we ultimately have no idea what everybody's doing on social media, because they're all looking at their own stuff as defined by the algorithm. And, some of that can be really, really dangerous. And it's a big black hole, basically, that we're pouring all this stuff into, and nobody knows what comes out of it. Sorry, that's my inherently...
Somebody's been annoyed by Elon Musk.
Yeah, suddenly coming out there. I just get very nervous about it. I think.
I understand that. I do understand that. I think.
And when you see these figures that so many people are relying on social media as the first point of call, it's eye-opening. It's really eye-opening.
But it's so easy too, and I would say that 38 million plus people aren't, on the whole, they're aware of the credibility of different people and different organisations, and I think that's where maybe there is a layer of safety verification that can be given to some of these influencers to say, we've checked these guys out and they're not trying to take your, Mrs. Miggins' pension pot. They're trying to do, and listen, that has happened before social media with rogue firms as well. So it'll always be an issue that we're battling against. But I just, as you say, the scale of this and the speed in which these things can spread means that I think there does need to be a tighter framework. And I think people are moving towards that. And I think the message for me, when I speak to the companies that I speak to, is that young people want you to be part of that. But it's not like they say, "Oh, get out of the way. I just want to hear from these influencers." They want to see what the retail banks have to say. They want to see what the investment firms have to say, in conjunction with some of the other people who might put it in more accessible kind of way. And I think, in fairness, again, to some of the research we did with these large organisations, they are speaking to these influencers. They're doing partnerships with them. So I think they're on the right track. Everybody's kind of heading in the right direction. But at the moment, that grey area is too big, and there are people who exist to the wrong side of those lines where it can have a serious impact. And we see things happen all the time. Meme coins is another example. I don't know if you've been following the Hawk Tour story. The lady who set up that meme coin. Loads of people have ended up with no money off the back of that, and there's lawsuits flying around. And those things, you want to see less of those at the end of the day, and you don't want the grounds to be too fertile for people to kind of get on with that. And also, just good guidance as you move through your financial life and see other people doing it. The power of the crowd in a good way, harnessing that idea that there is a way around this and somebody else has done this and they seem to be in a similar situation to me, earning a similar amount of money with the same kind of challenges that I have, and here's what they're doing about it. That's really powerful, that kind of, what are my peers up to? So trying to keep that essence, but overlay it with an additional layer of kind of credibility is the challenge, I think, that all of us face.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting area, and I know you and I have discussed it before, where that kind of work, financial firms using and working with influencers in order to provide a more kind of human message. Because it's one thing, when a logo starts tweeting about, how important it is to, budget, compared to somebody real, a human face telling you why it's so important to budget, or whatever that message might be. I think there is a relationship here that people need to be cognizant of, though, is when you hear an influencer talk about something and they're doing it in partnership with a business or a brand or whatever. Ultimately, they're being paid by that brand to provide a message that the brand is happy to appear.
That's true.
And, it's not. I'm not making an inherent judgment call there, but there is a qualified relationship in that sense. Whereas when you're dealing with how a journalist might speak to a financial organisation, there is going to be a bit more of an adversarial approach where the journalist is being, or a spokesperson from the business perhaps has been put in a position where the journalist can ask tougher questions, even if it's, and we do it on the podcast all the time. We have people on from financial services. We talk to them about a topic that they're interested in talking about. They're not, unless we announce it on the airways, they're not paying to be there, So we are trying to have a proper constructive discussion. I think there's a fine balance there, basically, and I'm not personally a believer in ruining someone's day by asking them god awful questions for an hour and making them feel absolutely miserable. Sometimes it does have to happen. But I think, I don't know. It's just something for people to be. For me, it's something people to be aware of, that there is a different, kind of relationship depending on the person who's the interlocutor of the conversation. Ultimately, to use a big word.
I think that's fair enough, and you're right. We're interested in being sort of transparent and clear about how all of these things kind of happen, and that is one thing. I think on the whole, though, the optimism, we've gone down into sort of the murkier end. The optimism of young people is really encouraging, and the fact that they do feel more positive about their money and they're more willing to talk about it and willing to make more demands of the people who supply the products and services for them. That I want help doing this. I want to know more about this. I want you to tell me, and that can only be a good thing. And it goes back to the loud budgeting thing we talked about before, and why we do this podcast. Essentially, more talking about money helps to give people a greater frame of reference, more education, more confidence, makes them feel better about heading in the sort of direction they want to deliver the financial outcomes that they want. And I think everyone in this space, by and large, is trying to do that. I think with some notable exceptions and too many. But if we carry on that, then I think hopefully we will see people achieving their ambitions. And the message we got from this is that they're confident they will do, and this is how they want to go about it: being louder about it, being prouder about it, having longer conversations, and trying to get more information from as many reputable sources as possible. So, for me, that's a positive. That's a good thing. And 2025, I think young people want financial services to reclaim a bit more influence, I think. So they need to respond to that, and we need to start making it easier for them to do that. And we'll play our small part in that, Ed, I suppose, in these conversations.
Yeah, I do. I mean, that optimism, we're kind of coming to a conclusion here, but I think that the point about the optimism I thought was very interesting. And to me, it stands a little bit in contrast, perhaps, to how the general sentiment of how things are at the moment in the UK, and perhaps even my own kind of personal sentiment about how things might be going.
Well, you're a grizzled 36-year-old now, Edmund. That's
correct. And I mean, the thing for me is that when you look at where things are going well for people, realistically, I mean, inflation is not as bad as it was. It's still not great. The best thing that's happening to people's finances at the moment is wages are going up. That's pretty much the only thing. And one wonders, how much do young people really care about bond yields? Probably not very much. I care about bond yields because I'm painfully aware of the relationship between bond yields and things like my mortgage rate and that kind of stuff. And older people maybe do have a bit more to be worried about now, especially if they're worrying about whether they're going to get as much out of the house as they might want to, whether they've got enough to get out their pension, which might have gone down because it's all correlated to bonds that are doing terribly at the moment and that kind of thing. So one wonders if yeah, young people are more optimistic because they've perhaps got less at stake at the moment. But I guess that is something we'll have to leave to the uncertainty of the world. But yeah, interesting. Any final stuff? Where can we find the report if we need to have a read?
Well, you can find it if you have a look at the MRM website, www.mrm-london.com. There'll be loads of stuff on there. Follow us on the socials if you can, at MRM. And you will be able to... We'll put some stuff in the show notes as well, it won't be, Ed. But yeah, do take a look if you're interested in money and finance and information and how to get it. And I do think we may come back to this subject again over the course of this year. It does feel like it's a live topic when it comes to sort of financial products and everything else. So as well as talking about what's out there and what's going on, how you receive your information is under increasing scrutiny. So do be mindful of that. Do be mindful about where it's coming from, who it's coming from, why you might be hearing this thing, and critically engage with it, I think is the big thing that's coming out of it.
Brilliant. Well, thanks, Chris. Thanks for telling us all about the report. Coming up, we've got lots more stuff. I can't remember off the top of my head now, but it's all good. So please do give us a like and subscribe. And thank you again for listening. We'll see you soon. And goodbye.
Don't forget to subscribe to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or YouTube. You can also follow all our latest updates on TikTok, Instagram, or X. Finally, check out all our money stories on the Mouthy Money website and subscribe to our weekly newsletter for all the latest straight to your inbox. Thank you and goodbye.